For more than a century, Europe's most dangerous political problem wasn't Germany, it wasn't France, and it wasn't even Russia. It was a question: what happens when the Ottoman Empire collapses? Because by the late 18th century, European governments were increasingly convinced that one of the world's great empires was weakening. And that created a problem. The Ottoman Empire controlled territory stretching across the Balkans, the Middle East, and parts of North Africa. It controlled Constantinople. It controlled access between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean, and it stood directly between Russia and the warm waters to its south. If the empire disappeared, someone would inherit those lands. Russia wanted influence in the Balkans and access towards the Mediterranean. Austria feared what Russian expansion and Balkan nationalism might mean for its own empire. Britain worried about the route to India and the balance of power. France had ambitions of its own in the Mediterranean and North Africa, and beneath all of this were millions of Greeks, Serbs, Bulgarians, Romanians, Arabs, Armenians, and others whose futures could not simply be reduced to lines on a European map. For roughly 150 years, diplomats would return to the same question again and again. Who gets the Ottoman Empire? The Europeans called it the Eastern Question. A useful place to begin is 1774. The Ottoman Empire had just lost another war against Russia. The resulting Treaty of Küçük Kaynarca was humiliating. Russia gained territory and important privileges. The Crimean Khanate was declared independent of Ottoman authority, although Russia would annex Crimea less than a decade later, and Russia's influence around the Black Sea expanded dramatically. This mattered because the Ottoman Empire was no longer simply viewed as a powerful rival on Europe's southeastern frontier. Increasingly, European statesmen began treating Ottoman weakness itself as an international problem. Russia could benefit enormously from Ottoman decline. But if Russia became too powerful, Britain, Austria, and eventually France had reason to resist it. And so a strange pattern emerged. European powers might want Ottoman territory. They might interfere in Ottoman affairs. They might even fight the Ottomans. But they could also find themselves defending the Ottoman Empire because its survival was sometimes preferable to allowing another European power to inherit too much of it. That contradiction would define the Eastern Question. Then came another force European diplomats could not fully control: nationalism. In 1821, the Greek War of Independence began. For the Ottoman government, this was a rebellion. For many Europeans, however, Greece occupied a special place in the cultural imagination. Ancient Greece was celebrated as one of the foundations of European civilization. Public sympathy for the Greek cause spread. But governments were thinking about something much larger. If Greece became independent, what happened next? Would Serbia follow? Bulgaria? Romania? Would Russia use Orthodox Christian populations inside the Ottoman Empire to expand its influence? The Greek revolt therefore became more than a struggle between Greek revolutionaries and the Ottoman state. Britain, France, and Russia eventually intervened. In 1827, their fleets destroyed the Ottoman Egyptian fleet at Navarino. And in 1830, Greece was internationally recognized as an independent state. A precedent had been created. Ottoman territory could become a new nation, and once that possibility existed, the map of southeastern Europe became increasingly unstable. Then something remarkable happened. The Ottoman Empire nearly collapsed, and European powers helped save it. In the 1830s, Muhammad Ali of Egypt, officially an Ottoman governor but increasingly independent, rebelled against Sultan Mahmud II. His armies were extraordinarily successful. At one point, Egyptian forces advanced deep into Anatolia. The Ottoman government was in serious danger, and the Sultan turned to Russia for assistance. That terrified Britain and France, not because they suddenly loved the Ottoman Empire, but because Russian domination of Constantinople would fundamentally alter the European balance of power. This is the paradox at the heart of the Eastern question. The Ottoman Empire could be considered weak, backward, even doomed. Yet the same European governments predicting its eventual collapse repeatedly worked to prevent that collapse from happening. Why? Because nobody could agree on what should replace it. By the 1850s, the contradiction finally exploded into a major European war. Russia and the Ottoman Empire went to war in 1853. Britain and France then entered the conflict on the Ottoman side. Think about that. Two of Europe's great Christian powers went to war against Christian Russia to defend the Muslim Ottoman Empire. Not primarily because of affection for the Sultan, but because Russian expansion threatened the balance of power. The Crimean War became one of the clearest demonstrations that Ottoman survival had become part of European strategy. Russia was defeated. The Treaty of Paris in 1856 formally admitted the Ottoman Empire into what diplomats called the Concert of Europe. On paper, Ottoman territorial integrity had been guaranteed. But the deeper problem remained. The empire was still under pressure. Nationalist movements were growing. Russia still had ambitions, and European governments still wondered what would happen when Ottoman power finally disappeared from Europe. They had postponed the Eastern question. They had not answered it. 20 years later, the crisis returned. Revolts broke out across the Balkans. Serbia and Montenegro went to war with the Ottoman Empire. Russia intervened. The Russo-Turkish War of 1877-78 ended in another major Ottoman defeat. Russia then imposed the Treaty of San Stefano, and suddenly, the nightmare Britain and Austria-Hungary had feared seemed possible. A huge Bulgarian state was created. On paper, it was autonomous. In practice, European governments feared it could become a vehicle for Russian influence deep into the Balkans. Britain objected. Austria-Hungary objected. Europe moved dangerously close to another major confrontation, so the powers met in Berlin. The Congress of Berlin in 1878 was supposed to solve the crisis. It did what 19th-century European diplomacy often did. It redrew the map. Serbia, Montenegro, and Romania received recognition as independent states. Bulgaria was reduced from the much larger state envisioned at San Stefano. Austria-Hungary was permitted to occupy and administer Bosnia and Herzegovina. Britain took control of Cyprus under a separate arrangement with the Ottomans. Russia retained territorial gains. Everyone received something, and almost nobody was satisfied. The Ottoman Empire lost more territory. Russia believed Germany had failed to support it sufficiently. Austria-Hungary became increasingly entangled in the Balkans. Balkan nationalist ambitions remained unresolved, and Bosnia-Herzegovina would eventually become the center of another crisis, the Bosnian annexation crisis of 1908. The Eastern question wasn't disappearing, it was becoming more dangerous. Then the losses accelerated. France occupied Tunisia in 1881. Britain occupied Egypt in 1882. Italy invaded Ottoman Libya in 1911. And then came the Balkan Wars. In 1912, Bulgaria, Serbia, Greece, and Montenegro attacked the Ottoman Empire. The results were catastrophic. Within months, the Ottomans lost almost all of their remaining European territory. An empire that had once reached deep into Central Europe was pushed back almost to Constantinople itself. By 1914, the question was no longer whether Ottoman power in Europe had declined. It clearly had. The question was whether the empire itself could survive. Then Europe went to war. The Ottoman Empire entered the First World War on the side of Germany and Austria-Hungary. And while Ottoman soldiers were still fighting, Britain and France were already discussing what would happen if they won. In 1916, British diplomat Mark Sykes and French diplomat François-Georges Picot negotiated the agreement that would become synonymous with the partition of the Ottoman Middle East. The agreement divided areas into zones of British and French control and influence. Russia was also expected to receive territory under separate wartime arrangements. After more than a century of asking what would happen when the Ottoman Empire collapsed, the Allied powers were now drawing possible answers on maps. But there was a problem. The people living on those maps had their own plans. Arab leaders had been negotiating with Britain. Armenian political aspirations were growing. Zionism had introduced another political project into Ottoman Palestine. Turkish nationalism was developing. And the collapse of Russia in 1917 transformed the diplomatic situation again. The Eastern question was no longer simply a game played between European empires. The peoples of the Ottoman world were becoming political actors in determining what came next. In 1918, the Ottoman Empire was defeated. The moment European diplomats had anticipated for generations had finally arrived, and the victorious Allies attempted to impose their answer. The Treaty of Sèvres in 1920 proposed a dramatically reduced Ottoman state. Greece received territory around Smyrna. Armenian independence was recognized. Kurdish autonomy and potentially independence was contemplated. France and Britain secured enormous influence across former Ottoman territories. The Ottoman Empire appeared to be undergoing the partition European statesmen had discussed for more than a century. Except, the settlement didn't survive. A Turkish nationalist movement, led by Mustafa Kemal, rejected it. A new war began. Greek forces were defeated. The Sultanate was abolished, and the victorious Turkish nationalist government forced the Allies back to the negotiating table. In 1923, the Treaty of Lausanne replaced Sèvres. The borders of modern Turkey were internationally recognized. The foreign occupation zones envisioned at Sèvres disappeared. The Ottoman Empire was gone, but so was the European plan to divide Anatolia in the way many had expected. And this is where the Eastern question reaches its strange conclusion. For 150 years, European diplomats had worried about what would happen when the Ottoman Empire collapsed. They fought wars over it. They held congresses over it. They created states. They occupied territories. They made secret agreements. They repeatedly tried to manage the empire's decline without allowing any rival power to benefit too much. And when the empire finally disappeared, Europe still didn't completely control the outcome. The Eastern question is often described as the problem created by the decline of the Ottoman Empire. But that description misses something important. The real problem wasn't simply that the Ottoman Empire was weakening, it was that no one could agree on what should replace it. Russia wanted security and influence around the Black Sea and the Straits. Britain wanted to prevent Russian domination and protect imperial communications. Austria-Hungary feared both Russian expansion and nationalism in the Balkans. France pursued influence across the Mediterranean and the Middle East. New nationalist movements wanted states of their own. And the Ottoman government was not simply waiting passively to disappear. It reformed. It fought. It negotiated. It played the European powers against one another. And it survived far longer than generations of European observers expected. That may be the greatest irony of the Eastern question. Europe spent roughly 150 years preparing for the death of the Ottoman Empire, and for much of that time, the fear of what would happen after its death was one of the things keeping it alive. And that brings us to the end of Season 1 of the Porte Papers. Across this season, we've looked beyond the familiar story of an empire simply declining. We've seen an empire reforming, resisting, negotiating, losing territory, and repeatedly surviving predictions of its own collapse. But there are still stories buried in the final decades of the Ottoman world that deserve a closer look. And in Season 2, we're going deeper, into the events historians still debate, the myths that became accepted history, the crises that almost changed the 20th century before it had truly begun, and the decisions whose consequences are still felt today. We'll ask whether the Armenian genocide was centrally planned, and why historians still argue over the evidence. We'll look again at Lawrence of Arabia and ask who really won the Desert War. We'll return to the forgotten European crisis of 1908 that almost brought the great powers to war 6 years before Sarajevo. And we'll examine what happened when the Turkish Republic abolished an institution that had existed, in one form or another, for more than 1,000 years: the Caliphate. Season 1 was about understanding how the Ottoman world reached its end. Season 2 is about questioning what we think we know about how it happened. This is the Porte Papers, and we're only getting started.